Welcome to The Explainer. Look, today we're bypassing the usual tired debates and jumping straight into a fascinating, wildly developed ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that might be operating right down your street or strictly outlawed just across the border. We're talking about the modern cannabis marketplace. The sheer scale and complexity of this global phenomenon, it might actually surprise you, whether you're already a policy expert or just casually informed. We're going to explore how an industry pumping out thousands of highly technical products manages to exist under this dizzying, fractured umbrella of international law. Let's get right into it.
To really understand where we are today, we just need to look at a modern online retailer like Salt & Vade. 3,935. Think about that number for a second. That is the staggering number of distinct, highly specific seed varieties available in their catalog alone. We're talking about thousands of genetic variations that have been meticulously bred, categorized, and put right at a consumer's fingertips. This isn't some small, underground operation anymore. It's a highly optimized commercial sector offering an unbelievable diversity of products. And honestly, it brilliantly illustrates the massive scale of consumer demand and horticultural development going on right now.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the modern cannabis catalog goes way, way beyond just seeds. The infrastructure supporting this whole ecosystem is incredibly sophisticated and, honestly, surprisingly normalized. We're looking at things like 100% bio-vegan fertilizers, fully automated hydroponic drip systems, high-tech LED and LEC climate control lighting, even complex resin extractors. These are seriously advanced agricultural and botanical tools, and they're sitting right alongside everyday drugstore items like CBD body care and scented candles. It's a booming commercial storefront that looks just like any other highly specialized hobby or agricultural market out there.
But here is where we hit a massive contradiction. You have this booming, highly commercialized storefront on one hand, and then a deeply complex legal reality on the other. You really have to ask, wait, how is all of this actually regulated globally? How can such an advanced commercial ecosystem even exist when the laws surrounding it are just a messy patchwork of international policies?
Section 1. The spectrum of legality, navigating global law.
So, the global legal landscape for cannabis, it is absolutely not black and white. Based on Wikipedia data, it's more like a giant, rapidly shifting spectrum of local, national, and international laws. And those laws can radically change the second you cross a border. On one end, you've got countries like Canada and Uruguay, right? Recreational markets there are fully legal and regulated. Move slightly down that spectrum, and you see places like Portugal and Brazil, where the drug remains technically illegal, but possession is decriminalized. Then you've got this fascinating gray area in countries like Cambodia or Egypt, where cannabis is officially illegal, but the laws are frequently just unenforced. And finally, on the far opposite end of the spectrum, you have absolute strict prohibition. In countries like Japan and Malaysia, possession results in severe, uncompromising penalties.
To really put this into perspective, we have to look at the extremes of this spectrum. Take Malta. In 2021, Malta legalized home cultivation and even authorized the creation of non-profit cannabis social clubs for adults. Pretty open, right? But then, fly across the globe to Malaysia. Under Malaysian law, an individual caught possessing more than 200 grams of cannabis is legally defined as a drug trafficker, and that conviction carries a mandatory death penalty. Think about that. It is the exact same plant, but depending purely on your geographic coordinates, the state's response ranges from legally sanctioned social clubs all the way to capital punishment.
So what is actually driving the shift in countries that are choosing to legalize? Well, the sources point to a few primary arguments fueling this movement worldwide. First up is restricting minor access, essentially taking the product out of the illicit market where there are no ID checks. Second is harm reduction. A regulated system ensures you have a known THC potency and completely eliminates toxic additives or synthetic cannabinoids. Third, legalization is strongly argued to reduce the power and the revenue streams of organized crime. And finally, just from a pure resource perspective, advocates argue it frees up police time, eases the burden on the criminal justice system, and ultimately saves taxpayer money.
And you can clearly see those arguments translating into actual policy, with a massive acceleration over the last decade. It really started to pick up when Uruguay kicked things off in 2013. Then, in 2018, both Canada and South Africa changed their laws. Malta followed in 2021, and most recently in April 2024, Germany passed an act legalizing adult possession and home cultivation. The crucial takeaway here is that while the majority of the world still prohibits recreational use, the sheer momentum of legalization has noticeably accelerated in recent years. It's spreading fast.
Section 2. Medical versus recreational use. The Great Divide.
Now, while recreational use is this wild patchwork of legality, the medical application of cannabis is a lot more widely accepted. Though, to be fair, it's still governed by a labyrinth of really intense regulations. A totally pivotal moment for this divide happened in 2020. That year, the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs officially reclassified cannabis. They removed it from the absolute strictest drug category, which is Schedule 4, leaving it only as a Schedule 1 drug under international treaties. Now, Schedule 1 still designates a substance as having a serious risk of abuse, for sure. But this reclassification officially acknowledged its medical utility on the global stage, giving countries a lot more leeway to actually establish medical programs. And nowhere illustrates this crazy conflict between national and local laws quite like the United States. 40 individual states, along with 4 territories and the District of Columbia, have legalized the medical use of cannabis. That's despite strict federal prohibition at the national level, where cannabis remains entirely 100% illegal. It is a massive regulatory contradiction. You literally have a substance that is completely prohibited by the national government, yet it's legally permitted, regulated, and prescribed by doctors in the vast majority of its local jurisdictions. So, how does this medical market actually operate day to day? Well, it's often highly restricted. In a lot of countries, medical cannabis is only available as very specific prescription pharmaceuticals derived from the plant, drugs like Sativex or Epidiolex. You also have this massive booming market for regulated CBD products that contain less than 0.3% THC, which is the psychoactive component. And when whole plant cannabis is actually allowed, it's usually strictly reserved and prescribed for serious, chronic, or terminal conditions. We're talking about conditions like multiple sclerosis, HIV/AIDS, and cancer. Section 3. The philosophy of cannabis: freedom versus prohibition. All right, to truly get to the core of all this, we need to zoom out a bit and explore the deeper ethical questions. The source material draws heavily from the book Cannabis: Philosophy for Everyone, which frames this entire debate around human nature and personal freedom. It poses a really fascinating thought. We are programmed to pursue pleasure and happiness, and yet we find ourselves thrown into a world that is incapable of satisfying those desires. The philosophers in this text are examining the very precept of freedom. They're asking, should second or third parties, like governments, have the right to interfere in voluntary harm to oneself, especially when we're talking about a substance that, while potentially harmful, does not cause death?
So you see, the debate isn't just about legal statutes. It touches on metaphysics, phenomenology, and cognitive psychology. It scrutinizes that precept against harming oneself, pointing out that historical prohibitions usually focus heavily on suicide, not on consuming substances to relax. They even question the ethics of consumption under legal prohibition. Is it inherently morally wrong to break a law just to alter your own consciousness? Actually, scratch that. It goes even deeper. What is the moral status of smoking strictly for pleasure? It's a fundamental philosophical debate about exactly where state control ends and personal autonomy begins.
Ultimately, this whole exploration leaves us with some profoundly interesting questions, drawn right from the source material. What exactly does it mean to get high? And more importantly, is altering our consciousness a basic human need? As the laws continue to shift globally, and as the marketplace just keeps expanding with thousands of new botanical varieties and high-tech tools, the moral and social dimensions of prohibition remain the most fascinating puzzle of all. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, diving into the cannabis paradox. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.